What was it like being raised in an unusual environment like a boat traveling the world touring with a family band or with interesting parents, geniuses, famous, very popular? My dad is fairly well known in the programming world, but it never really resonated with us. He would work crazy hours to develop new programs, yet still find time to be an incredible dad. I remember he used to eat espresso beans plain because he felt that they worked better than drinking espresso. Whenever he would have a new app or idea done, he would have us demo it on video as the typical user. I only recently realized what a big deal he was when I was working in DC and there was a big tech conference he was speaking at. He invited me to the cocktail reception afterwards and every single person wanted to talk to him. It was insane. The biggest takeaway for me was what an incredible dad he was, not sacrificing his family for work he obviously loved and excelled at. The eating coffee beans bit is so funny. I used to get the chocolate-covered espresso beans from Trader Joe's and they were awesome. But man, you can easily hit your caffeine LD50 with those. Those are delicious. He always went straight for the plain bean though. This is kinda dark, but I have a very famous father among the opera classical music theater people. Yet he was emotionally abusive. It is so surreal having everyone think this is the greatest man they have ever met while behind closed doors my mother and I were in a living hell. When my mother eventually spoke up about the abuse to her so-called friends, everyone chastised her for being a lying biatch and trying to stain this amazing man's name. When I spoke up about it, these people would tell me I was a horrible, ungrateful child or would go to hell for hating my wonderful father. In short, a myriad of other things happened. My mom divorced. We tried escaping him. The court gave the asshole joint custody. His mother, my grandmother, came into the picture and was exactly like him but 100x worse, physically abusive. She tried drowning me one day, threatened to strangle me and my dog, etc. All while people told me they envied my perfect life with such an amazing and talented family, hoping I would continue their legacy in the fine arts as an opera singer. Hell no. Eventually Mom and I escaped to another country for 2 years and we have never seen them since. Edit. I usually hate edits, but I want you all to know I really appreciate the kind comments and awards. It helped talking about and getting this out. I am glad you don't see them anymore and hope you are okay. Yep. I have not seen them for years, and have been doing infinitely better than we were. Thanks for asking. My dad is a rock star in a super niche area of economics. When I was a kid, he was always being sent across the globe to work in places like Albania, Kenya, China, Mauritius, wherever the World Bank or his university decided he was needed. So it was really cool when he had come home and bring things like camel saddles from Iran, or rugs from Kazakhstan. The flip side of this was that we lived on a dairy farm in a very rural area. So while Dad was off jet-setting and solving the world's problems, the rest of us were getting up at 5 a.m. every day to milk the cows before breakfast, harvesting corn, and hunting deer for fresh meat. I am a professor now in a totally different field and I still meet people from various universities and NGOs who hear my name and immediately ask if I am related to the professor name. Then they are baffled that I did not go into his same field. Excuse me, Miss Wave Petunias, but are you related to Professor Tsunami Petunias? Pretty much. Also, when we're out together, or he visits me on the campus where I work, someone will say, "Hello, Professor Petunias," and we will both respond. It is pretty cute. "Hello, Professor Petunias." Parents owned a bar and music venue. I was exposed to a wealth of art, culture, and people that most parents try to shield their children from. Pros: I am very knowledgeable about art and people. Cons: my parents were too busy doing cocaine to bother parenting me much. It sounds like a cross between the upbringing the protagonist dreamed of in Midnight in Paris and the gap year of a struggling musician, if you don't mind me saying in a good way. It's been really interesting. Would not trade it. But my therapist is making good money off me. As a relatively successful former foster child, this resonates with me so hard. What about unusual environments that were not positive? LOL. I grew up in a hoarder house. I could not really have friends over and we rarely had any guests. Before I got my own room, I shared one with my sister. I had to climb over junk to get to my bed. I also had mushrooms, yes. Literal mushrooms growing in between my bed and the wall. In elementary school, I used to crumple up my bad grade papers and just throw them in between my bed and the wall. Nobody noticed the mushrooms, so they sure as hell would not check my paper. When my brother eventually moved out, I got his room around 13-14. It had the same black mold problems as the rest of the house, but I would scrub it every year. Until I moved out. It was the cleanest room in the house. I vacuumed it a few times a week. No animals were allowed in my room. My mom had a ton of animals that would pee and poop everywhere. I burned incense constantly to get the smell out, and I always cleaned. But after like 8-9, I could not have any friends over. My house was too dirty for that. I was known as the smelly kid until I started doing my own laundry as a teenager. My mother and her husband continued to be hoarders long after I moved out. Tried to clean their house at least twice. When we tried to shampoo the carpets, it turned to sludge. Just had to get rid of all the carpets. Tried to throw stuff away. Every time I put broken stuff out on the curb, my stepdad would bring it right back in. We can use this broken lamp. Like, dude, you have at least 10 broken lamps in your house with random shit piled on top of them. You do not need this one. LOL. It is nice having my own house where I know I would not have to live that way again. Growing up, my mother was a hoarder too. I eventually realized it was not normal as a preteen and stopped inviting people over. I am in my 20s now and I still am embarrassed to have a significant other visit my parents' house. I even have dreams to this day that my friends are visiting me at my parents' house and I am frantically trying to clean as much as possible. My mom was at one point during my high school time arrested and spent couple months in jail, and during college was hospitalized for a while, and both times I tried to make the place look as normal as possible, but it all just went back to normal. I am very glad to have a place of my own, and now I literally only have stuff that I use, kinda minimalist aesthetics but not as extreme. Nothing angers frustrates me more now than clutter. I know exactly what you mean about the anxiety thing. Even now. Clean house. If someone is coming over, I get that same dreaded feeling that I cannot let them inside. I still catch myself doing the thing where you squeeze out of the barely open door so they cannot see the mess inside, just to realize we have a glass door and it is clean inside. I hate that anxiety. I allow myself to splurge on my house. After college, I bought brand new couches and brand new other furniture for a really great deal actually, and all my friends were trying to convince to buy used furniture online. I couldn't really explain to them how much it meant to me to finally have a place to live that I'm proud of. I grew up in rural Alaska and my parents were dog mushers for about 20 years. We had maybe 30-40 dogs at the peak when I was 12 years old, and they all had to be trained every other day. It was my job and my brother's job to feed them all and scoop poop. It was fun but a lot of hard work. Dad treated all the dogs himself, worming them, sewing them up if they got hurt, etc. We had this old diesel truck with a massive building on the back that you could walk inside that had dozens of cubbies in the walls for transporting the dogs to races and to get vaccines. 2008 hit and my parents had to give most of them away to other mushers to make ends meet, and that was the end of that. I miss those dogs sometimes. Did you have a favorite? What's training like? I bet you have so many cute puppy memories. I am jealous. Yeah, we had this really handsome big dog named Elvis. He was the best. Just really gentle and smart. Magnum was a good dog too. He had pure silver fur and looked like a wolf. Dad always said he might have had some wolf blood in him. My dad also made dog sleds because he was a construction worker in the summer and good with his hands. Loads of people bought sleds from us in the valley. Well, we ran the dogs on the trails maybe 25 miles on a short day, or go on 100-mile trips up to the Brooks Mountain Range for multiple days. We ran 10 dogs per team. Sometimes 12 for the long distances. The puppies were started at maybe 8 months old in the summer running the quad. Smart dogs we trained to be leaders that would respond to voice commands. Let's go. Haul left, I think it was. G right. And woe to stop. Dogs that were strong and did not stop were hooked right in front of the sled. We had puppies maybe every 3 years. It always happened when one of the males got loose and broke into what my dad called the biatch pen. He had to have his way, and a few months later the new litter was born. One year me and my brother loved Scooby-Doo a lot, so we convinced our parents to name them after the characters. There was Scoob, Fred, Velma, and Daphne. Poor Daphne was a male dog though. Unfortunate. Edit: the reason Shaggy was not in the litter was because we already had a dog named Shaggy. Elvis, please tell me you have photos aka dog tax. It's so interesting, you can tell by their puppy personalities what role they'd be good in. Had a friend who spent a few years on a boat growing up. It was when he was around 10-14. It was him, his parents and his sister. He's got interesting stories, but the one takeaway that always comes to mind is that he can no longer eat bananas. At some point they prepped for a portion of their trip that was going to have them for a few months. They loaded up on banana and he had to eat 2-4 every day. He is in his early 30s now and will not touch a banana. I had a teacher who banned all bananas on all school trips they went on because they couldn't stand them. My dad was an addict with severe mental health issues who was a member of the Hells Angels. My mom and I lived in women's shelters for short periods of time when he would decide to kick us out in the middle of the night or if they got into a fight. He got off the hard drugs and turned into a raging narcissist. Moved 3,000 miles away and sent me photos of his wonderful new life without me. It was not great. But my mom did all that she thought she could with what we had. Your dad was an abusive, drug-addicted biker. Then he sobered up and became a worse person. Duck that guy. I am weirdly impressed. In a bad way. I grew up in an Ivy League college town, which both my parents worked for as history professors. I always took it for granted until I went to college, and then I realized how well they had set me up for the world. They were constantly asking to read my work, and I think that greatly improved my writing skills and soft skills, like taking and giving helpful feedback. I feel like I just approach the world with a very inquisitive mindset, and I think I have them to thank for that. That's lovely. Did you go on to do history or something else entirely? I am a junior now in communications. My mom especially told me that I wouldn't enjoy her profession. She wishes she had more time to collaborate. So much of their time is spent researching and writing books. I love history, but would never want it as a career. It seems like it's either publish or teach, and I want to do neither. What is your parents' focus? And books. I love books. I grew up with bohemian parents. I was born in the 80s and did not live in a house with a flushing toilet until I was 14. When my parents were still married, we lived in what I can best describe as a Lincoln log cabin with my dad's own version of the Louvre glass pyramid on top of it. We did have a shower, but more often than not, there were baby ducks or swans living in there. We had a wood stove, but no heating on the upper floor, which was connected to the log cabin level by half a staircase and half a ladder over a rock pit. This was all on an island, so I was driven by boat to and from school every day, or walked on the ice, or stayed home if neither worked. I feel like I'm rambling on now. I am sorry OP. If you want more, I have it LOL. Like when the chickens had to move into the kitchen over winter. For context, we were not poor. During this same time we went on skiing vacations in the Alps, and Dad went to science conferences in Hong Kong, etc. Please ramble. I want to hear all your stories. Did you name the ducklings? I did not. But the neighbor's kid teenager who came over a lot named them Magi, etc. because they constantly escaped. Do you mind telling us another story, because a few people have upvoted me, so I think they want to hear one as well. Not sure this is that unusual, but when I was in high school my parents moved to Europe and sent me to boarding school. It forced me to grow up really quickly, and in hindsight was an amazing advantage by the time I got to college. At the time it was pretty hard to adapt, but ultimately I am grateful for the experience. That's interesting. Did you spend holidays with them? Christmas, yes. But those with shorter breaks like Thanksgiving and Easter, it didn't really make sense. I mostly went to stay with friends, girlfriends, or other family members. Some summers I went and lived with them. Others I worked or took summer school classes to knock out requirements I wasn't that interested in to free up my class schedule during the year to take classes where I was passionate about the topic. When you did come back and visit them, was it uncomfortably formal? Or was it really nice to see them after a long time instead of awkward? My dad worked 365 days a year from the time I was 9-ish to 18-ish. Single-parent household meant I was constantly by myself. He went into work at about 11 a.m. and came home about 11 p.m. as well. In all those years he probably had a total of 20 days off. In all those years I probably had 20 conversations with him. It ducked me up. Man, a father should be there for his children. I get it though. What did he do that he worked that much? He had 2 low-paying jobs. One during the week and one on weekends and holidays. Well, sorry to hear that, man. Hope you are doing well as banker. When I was 14, my parents sold our house, cars, and 90% of our belongings and we moved onto a boat. Unfortunately, there were some big repairs that needed to be done on the boat and we had more and more problems with it. So when I was 15, they sold the boat and we traveled by plane, train, cars around the world to 24 different countries for about 8 months. We came home when I was 16 and I started my senior year of high school and things have been normal ever since. I would not trade my experience for anything. But traveling all the time can be very isolating. I was away from all of my friends for 3 of my teenage years. And my friend group had pretty much split apart by the time I had gotten back. It was also hard to come home to my small town in the Midwest USA after having traveled the world and having nobody to share my experience with. Everything, in a sense, had been just like I left it. It was disorienting. Something people ask me about all the time is, what about school? I have been homeschooled since 1st grade. So school was not really an issue or any big change for me while we were traveling. I did an online math program, studied French out of a book, and kept a travel journal. And those were the only 3 school things I did during my junior year. LOL. One long-lasting effect I have had from the trip is that I'm now pretty minimalistic. Living out of a backpack for 8 months teaches you how much you really can live without. I do not own very many items now, although I have allowed myself to start hoarding books again. That is my one splurge. Yeah, I feel like I can relate to this somewhat. I move across the US over 1,000 miles to work a very niche and dangerous job for 6 months, then I'm home for the other 6. Every year, I feel like I have 2 lives and none understands the other. I do feel isolated and lonely often, especially when I am in the car for 3 days by myself. That is still my dream, to travel abroad minimalist, living out of a backpack. So lucky to have experienced it at a young age. What's your job if you don't mind sharing? I am guessing maybe oil and gas. My dad was very well known in the water park designing industry, but he never really let on how well known he was. He told me that he had worked with big names such as Celine Dion. She wanted a water park built for her son, and Eddie Van Halen. He had a guitar-shaped pool designed by his company. I didn't realize it until sadly he passed away of a heart attack and hundreds of people came to his funeral. This is before COVID. Apparently people from all over the world were sending the company condolence emails. I was really amazed that so many people around the world knew his name, but he never told us. He was very humble. This is such an interesting response. Your dad sounds like he was a very cool and talented person. Due to a very bitter divorce that resulted in financial ruin, my family had to live in a derelict office building my mom owned. For a while, we had utilities and were able to have a semi-normal life. Eventually though, power and water were cut off. We had limited food and water access. Had to bathe with a water hose and wash our clothes in a bin and hang dry it. Rodents and bugs eventually became an issue, as did black mold, which my sisters and I are allergic to. It wasn't great. I often wonder why my mom had us live in those conditions and how no one called children's services. Sometimes I wish they had, as the experience was very dangerous, traumatic, and alienating. I think the entire ordeal has made my siblings and I more resourceful and resilient, but it was very difficult. We were in this situation for about 3 years. What was that like? What size and style of building was it falling down around you? Was it near other offices or businesses? Did you and your siblings have epic hide and seek games? I imagine you did not have friends over. I am just trying to imagine what this was like. Aside from it sounding pretty horrible when it comes to health and isolation. It was an old warehouse that was turned into an office building. It was 2 stories and took up half of the small block we were on. It was in a super seedy part of town across from the county jail. Actually, and it wasn't a super great area to have small kids in. It was falling down around us. There were mold issues, some infrastructure issues, and the aforementioned pest issues. It was also difficult to live there without any utilities. It did, however, have a large area attached to the back of the property that had some trees and grass. It was amazing to play in, until they used needles, condoms, and transience became an issue. We didn't have friends over nor family. Thanks for sharing. Being the daughter of a lighthouse keeper was quite unusual. There are no lighthouse keepers in Scotland anymore. When I was young, I dreamed of growing up to be the first female lighthouse keeper. I always wanted to be a lighthouse keeper when I grew up too. Everyone thought I was super weird, but I was happiest as a kid when I was by myself reading, so I imagined building my dream library inside a lighthouse and living out my days that way while making sure no boats crashed. Imagine how cozy that would be on a stormy day. Really beautiful little dream there. Wasn't me, but met a family that had spent close to a decade touring the world on a 30-something-foot sailboat. I didn't know them well. I was their guest for Thanksgiving weekend almost 20 years ago. They were family friends with a girl I was dating at the time. They'd had a kid underway and lived on the boat for the next 7-ish years. I met them a couple years later when the kid was around 10. My biggest impression was this dude's insane sense of balance. They had a jungle gym swing set deal in their backyard, and the kid really enjoyed walking along the top crossbar of the swing set while people were swinging, making the already narrow bar sway back and forth. I hope that didn't fade over time. I'd like to imagine he's out there somewhere walking tightropes for fun. I have some friends who have been on a sailboat for over a decade. They sailed around the world once with their children and it took about 8 years the first time around. And now they are living in Mexico in the boat with 2 teenage daughters and their son is in college. I mean, the kids were very kind and polite, and their parents loved their lifestyle and spending so much time with their kids, so that was fantastic. They asked the kids multiple times during the journey if they wanted to keep living the way they were or head home, and each time everyone said they wanted to keep going. On a personal note, I got some awesome postcards from islands impossible to get to. The one thing I know though is their son has had a tough time adjusting to college. Complained to his mom after one semester that he'd seen everything there was in his new city, so what was he supposed to do for the rest of college? Answer: he was planning to spend a year studying abroad. But of course now with the pandemic no one's going anywhere. And the kids just didn't really know much pop culture stuff. For better or worse, conclude what you will there on how important it is. Family has been on the Today Show if anyone wants to know more. Link. I spent one day with a different family who lives on a sailboat. Children were boys, about 15 and 17. Older kid was cool and confident, but lack of socialization was turning the younger one into an incel. The only girls he met were at the docks, others would go home and he was stuck there, horny and lonely. I doubt he ended very happy. Yeah. In this case, if I remember correctly, the parents made it a priority to coordinate with other kid boats and travel in the same direction together, especially in remote areas. So their kids had long-term friends over just passing acquaintances, etc. My understanding is for longer passages sometimes sailboats do it together in case there is trouble. But more often it is a we're gonna head to that island and catch up in a few days then hang out together for a week type thing. They said there were definitely boats out there where the parents did not coordinate like that though. I do not know if being raised in a military family counts, but I moved around the US and part of England from the time I was born until age 12. Never staying in one place for more than 2 years at a time. I will tell you this much: it sucks basically always being the new kid, but that had its unspoken advantages. I got really good at getting to know people where I went. To this day, one of my personality quirks is that I can get to know practically anybody quickly because that is just how the chips fell when I was younger. Same. Moved every 2 years until I graduated high school. It really does get easy to meet and know new people. But for me, I never really learned how to make lasting friendships. You kinda move away and move on. I always wondered what it was like for kids who grew up in the same house, same bedroom, same friends and whatnot their whole life. I kinda had both experiences. My dad still lives in the same house that I grew up in until the last 2 years of high school. Then I moved in with my grandparents for reasons. Then I joined the military myself as an adult. I am glad for the mobile lifestyle because there's lots of people I met over the years that I never want to see again for reasons. It's also nice to have a handful of friends living in places all around the world that I do keep in touch with. But it's also great to have the ability to let go of friendships that have run their course as well. I am always nostalgic for where I originally grew up, but I'm also very adaptable to any new place I visit. My sisters has never left their hometowns, and it's easy to see how afraid they are of things I consider normal. I can confidently run around any new place without fear, and they would consider half of the roads and alleyways I've trekked to be shady and scary. It's like a superpower to be so adaptable. My childhood was pretty normal, but when I was 18, myself and 2 friends decided to start a traveling circus. We toured every state in America for years. It was grubby, smelly, and sometimes dangerous. But it was an amazing time in my life. Absolutely incredible. Incredible would have been if we were more than 6 people, and if we played somewhere other than dive bars and street corners. And if we were actually talented. The truth is quite credible.